What up, y'all? This is Alex Clark-Youngblood. This episode, we have our first actual interview with another human being. This is an interview I recorded over 3 years ago now in February of 2017 at my mom's house in her living room in Atlanta, Georgia. And the guest on the podcast today is my mom. We basically just run through her life, but she's a beautiful person. So, we hop in and go down some rabbit holes as we move through the timeline of her life. Some rabbit holes. By rabbit holes, I mean discussions about a number of aspects of life, be it marriage, child rearing, the existence of a higher power, societal racism, all kinds of shit. I love my mom. She's a deeply beautiful person. I've said for a long time that I think she's part angel. I think she has one foot in this world and another foot in the next world, if there is a next world or in another dimension. I don't know. She's a transcendent person, and I love her very much, and I respect her very much. She is my hero. She raised me and my two sisters all by herself with no help on a teacher's salary, and I can't even fathom how that's possible. So, you'll now hear from perhaps the person that I love and respect more than anyone on the planet. So here's my mom. And it's a very special guest indeed. I introduce to you Robin Clark, my mother, and we're coming to you live and direct from her living room in Roswell, Georgia. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm very glad to be in my living room.
All right, Mom. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Just give us a brief, life history, where you're born, where you grew up, family dynamics when you were raised, just so that people know a little bit about you.
I was born in Dallas, Texas. We moved to Atlanta in 1963. I went to an actual race unity thing last night, and I was thinking about the difference in some of the conversations of the people at that meeting who were Black and their experiences and mine, because I actually wasn't really aware of the civil rights movement. I was only aware of some negative behaviors of people once we moved to Atlanta, but I didn't really realize integration was going on in schools or anything. We had mixed classrooms, but it was all fine. We lived near a university, so everybody was professional, and all our parents were kind of like young Kennedy people. So
I was just asking for a brief personal background, but you're getting into it deep. Keep going.
Well, it was on my mind because I was thinking about the dynamics of what make us ourselves. Because I think both my sets of grandparents were fairly racist. Kind people and good people who took care of people, all races, but yet certainly probably I know they believed in separation of races. And yet both my parents were not like that at all. So I was so lucky that whatever was occurring within the world at that moment changed my parents so that they took a different path from both sets of my grandparents, who I loved deeply and really didn't realize anything about the racial issue until I was probably in high school. But anyway, I was thinking about being in kindergarten in Dallas and doing that, like a Southern folk song about jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Mm-hmm. And we were in blackface, and I was thinking, anyway, I've kind of made fun of it to my mother that she would have allowed that to have happened, but I don't think anybody really thought about it at the time. Anyway, so moved to Atlanta. In Atlanta, where we lived in Atlanta was an amazing part of Atlanta because we didn't have, I don't want to say like I had Black friends that came to my house. I don't think my parents have had any problem with that. I don't really remember any Black girls specifically in my grade. There was a boy I kind of had a crush on, and I remember my brother had a crush on a girl, but they didn't live in our neighborhood, so it wasn't like we hung out all the time. And I guess really mostly when you're in elementary school, you hang out with the people on your street anyway. So I grew up here, and it was an amazing place to grow up. It was academically challenging, and we got to move within advanced curriculums. I had really great parents who I think were kind of like the model parents. We always had, my dad built us a tree house, even though he wasn't probably very handy. And we had a big fireplace in the backyard, and people came over. We roasted marshmallows, made s'mores. My parents were like the Girl Scout leaders. And I mean, my dad was, even in terms of like camping and stuff like that. They were young. They were like 19, just 20-year-olds when they had me in the first place. And it was really great. But there were things underlying within the relationship that it caused my dad to, I guess, look for somebody to care about him outside of their marriage. And then my parents broke up when I was like 16, and we moved to Louisiana, and that was a totally different and eye-opening experience. The racism was in your face. The division between black and white was just palpable. I mean, the advanced classes that I was usually placed in there were no black kids.
How old were you when you moved to Louisiana?
16.
16? Monroe, Louisiana.
Yeah.
Northern Louisiana.
Yeah.
Where ultimately I was born.
Yes. And it's a Bible Belt kind of Baptist, Methodist Bible Belt kind of place. And black people lived on one side of town and white people lived on another side of town. There was forced integration, so everybody went to each other's schools. As I said, in the advanced class I had, it was just an all-white class. I don't remember any black person being in that classroom. We had, some classes that didn't have an advanced placement, so those were more mixed. And I can remember talking to, like, the guy who's behind me and the guy next to me who were both black guys, and they didn't know what to do because I was talking to them. I remember one of them thought I liked him because I was talking to him. And I mean, I wasn't particularly interested in him. I just, had a friendship. I mean, he was my classmate. And I can remember my grandfather, he called the house one day. My grandfather getting really upset, and I'd never encountered that. It was just crazy. But anyway, that was an entire...
The black kid called the house one day. Your grandfather upset.
Yeah. And so... I don't know. It was just a whole different mindset, which I really disliked. But I guess in retrospect, I'm glad I was exposed to it. Anyway, I ended up just, I skipped a year of high school just because the school system there, I had been in advanced classes in Atlanta, and then the school system there just didn't have that level of competition. And so I just went to college, and I was really glad to escape it because not only was there a black-white separation, there was a socioeconomic separation. And I know my parents were never wealthy. They were very comfortable, middle-class people, but in their middle class was pushed into kind of an upper middle class, and everybody belonged to like a, country club. I mean, it was just crazy, kind of this old school kind of thing. So anyway, I was glad to go to university. And I just stayed at that university just because of some issues with regard to family needs of, my mom and younger brother.
Get into that a little more specifically. So what were your graduating, I assume, you said a year early, I'm assuming it's at or near the top of your class in your Louisiana high school. What were your prospects college-wise when you're graduating high school, and then ultimately, where'd you decide to go?
Well, it wasn't exactly like here where there's this time period where the people are as aware of you. I honestly didn't reach out to anyone because, first of all, the first expectation for me post leaving the high school was that I would go to the Louisiana college in the town, and I had to complete a year of college.
Which was the University of Louisiana Monroe.
Mm-hmm. I had to complete a year of college before I got my high school diploma. Mm-hmm. My mom had gone back to school, so she had already started the year I was a junior in high school. And she had 1 year prior to that before she and my dad got married. So she was like a junior when I entered school, and she was trying to accelerate her, graduation. So she was going summer. So I went summer that first summer after my junior year. So I think and then you could also, back then you could CLEP classes. So you just took a test, and if you made a high enough score, you didn't have to take classes. Mm-hmm. So I think by the time had finished the fall semester, I was already, maybe by the end of summer, I had already completed the 30 hours. I can't remember. Anyway, I ended up getting out of college in 3 years too, just because of that. So I never thought about this, but I could have gone, I think maybe even by the end of summer, I would have fulfilled the requirements for my senior year, that summer after junior year. So probably I could have gone other places. I didn't even think about applying anywhere my junior year of high school because it just sort of all happened. It was kind of like in the spring of my junior year, they kind of looked at me and they go, we don't know what you're going to take. And, they said, you want to take the ACT? I was like, it wasn't even a very super high score. I think it was like a 24 or something. And, do you want to take it if you make whatever and then you can go to college? And, that was easily done. So, anyways, but I didn't apply to college.
You just went to college.
Just went to that college, and that it was down the road. So
it's basically an extension of the logical next academically.
Yeah, and then I went with I drove with my mom. I was still living at my grandparents' house. We just drove in the car every day, and we just went our separate ways on campus, and then kind of stayed there all day, and then got back in the car and drove back home. Somewhere in the fall of what would have been my senior year in high school, probably on my second year in college. I mean, not my second year, but the first fall I was there. But I think, like I said, I think I was already a sophomore. I got like some letters in the mail from some colleges. I think Emory. I'm positive about Agnes Scott and Rice University. I can remember, and maybe Duke. I can't. Honestly, don't remember. I think it must have just been based on the fact that my ACT score was so high. I ended up making over 30, I think, I don't know, 31, 33, I can't remember. But, so I got letters in the mail offering me, enrollment. And then Agnes Scott called on the phone and, in which I guess in retrospect, some of that might have been more, it's not like now, like, I'm saying there was not as much information exchange. So, anyway, but it just didn't seem, I wasn't prepared to do that at that point. I guess I was still 17 too. I mean, not that that's super young or anything, but we had just had all this family transition. Sean had just probably turned 3.
Your parents had divorced. You moved back home with her parents.
Yeah, my grandparents had added onto their house, built a bedroom for me.
So y'all could move in?
Yeah, I mean, they built the bedroom for me, though.
Right.
There was this other bedroom. They already had an extra bedroom for my mom and Sean. And
Sean is?
3 years old. And my younger brother. I don't know. There's just so many dynamics, and I just didn't even think about really changing it. I mean, I thought about it, but at the same time, it seemed, and to go back to Atlanta seemed wrong because that's where my dad was, and they'd had a huge fight, and I, sided with my mom. Which at the time was, I don't know, that's probably that was probably the right thing to do. But in retrospect, I think there was, every situation is so much more complicated. Anyway, I ended up staying in Louisiana. And then by the time I graduated from there, it had really reduced. I took every single class. I literally asked people what was like the hardest class they took. So I systematically took everything, had double minors and stuff like that. Worked for the math department, but, and I guess probably in some ways I'd never have been able to be sure about my own needs ahead of other people's needs because I really, really think I wanted to go to medical school. And probably that would have been, I could have accomplished that because LSU had a medical school and stuff like that. But by the time I got through graduate school and started applying to psych schools, I think where I was coming from now limited where I could go.
Right.
And anyway.
So you finished school, and then what'd you do after?
So I was in graduate school in psychology, and I actually got pregnant with Katie. And
you're in graduate school at the same university?
At the same university, yeah. Ronnie and I had lived together for about 6 months, and then I realized Ronnie is Katie's dad. And then I realized
You're going to have to give a little more.
Okay, sorry.
You're speaking to an audience that has no idea who you are, so just a little more detail about these names and who these people are.
All right. So in right at the beginning of graduate school, I met a guy named Ronnie, who was a friend of a friend, and we dated for a long period of time. And then he wanted us to start having like a physical relationship, and I was just really, that's such an important thing to me. I didn't want it to be like I slept with him and went home. So I said, okay, if that's what's gonna, if that's the next step in our relationship, then I want us to at least semi-live together. You couldn't really totally live together comfortably without really upsetting my grandparents. Mm-hmm. So he was like 10 years older than me. So he worked for the telephone company. He had his own apartment. So I got I got like 3 jobs. I was a teaching assistant in the graduate school. And then I threw a paper out, and then I worked like a 3 to 11 job at a convenience store. Mm-hmm. And in order to stay in the apartment.
And you were still in graduate school at the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I lived across the street in another apartment complex, but basically, we spent all day, every day with each other. After work, or when I wasn't at work or he wasn't at work. And then the weekends he just stayed at my apartment. But that way it was something that other people weren't as aware that we were actually living together. It's not exactly living together, but mostly. And, but after about 6 months of living with him, I realized that our expectations for the role of a woman in a relationship were totally different. Mm-hmm. You know Ronnie, everybody else doesn't know him. And I'm kind of a strong-willed person too. I like to do things, myself, and he liked to do things himself. And he had some real problems with the fact that I had more education than he did. Anyway, I just realized it wasn't going to work out. And so I moved out. And at that point in life, in that time period, you could have like 6 months leases, and that's all I had signed anyway. So I moved back home. Also, I was pretty physically exhausted with all the things I was doing work-wise. So I needed to let at least one job go. Anyway, after that, he kept wanting us to get back together, and we had kind of like a one, not nightstand, because that's not the appropriate term, but we slept together one more time after we broke up and then we separated. And just because it wasn't an expected event, there was no preparation for it, and I ended up pregnant with Katie. So, I feel very strongly about kids, and I think in my life, I wanted children, and I probably wanted to be a physician. And so when I discovered I was pregnant, I knew my mother would not want me to have this child. And it kind of actually hurt my feelings a little bit, because I felt like I had supported her, but I knew that the social embarrassment for her would bother her more, and also the reality of how you're going to support the child and all that. She'd struggled with that. So there were some dynamics. Anyway, I just waited till I was pregnant enough that people wouldn't, back then I don't think people did abortions after 12 weeks, and I didn't want anyone even pressuring me for that. And so I just let it go until it was too late for anyone to intercede. Mm-hmm. And your Uncle Jay, actually, we had all gone to the beach, and Uncle Jay kind of looked at my body and went, "Are you pregnant?" And I could have hit him. But fortunately, it was like 12 weeks right then. And I was like, yes. And so we came back, and I was pretty much going to just do everything myself. But the pressure started coming from everywhere. And Ronnie really wanted me to try being married. And so we talked about it, and we made the decision. We actually had a wedding, and, a nice, just not very expensive. We just married at church and had a reception at my mom's house. We got married, and if I make a commitment, I try to follow through. But kind of like what I thought was going to be the difference between the two of us occurred. And he didn't want me to have any say in how money was spent. Anyway, it was a totally different situation than what I think of as
he's a Louisiana boy.
Yeah, yes, a Bastrop boy, actually. So it's an even smaller town. Another smaller town. So, but everything's a two-way street. There's nothing that's one person's issue, but it was just not the right situation for me. And so we really only stayed married about 6 weeks after Katie was born because there was an incident involving my younger brother where Ronnie lost his temper. And he was upset that I had gone to a movie with my mom. And we took Katie, but, that with us, but he was just upset, I think, that I had done something without him. Anyway, so I left, and he and I stayed married till Katie was 4, and he had started dating somebody, I think, when Katie was 2. Who's the most
married but separated.
Separated, right? And so he got married when Katie was 4, and he came and asked me. He said, "Okay," and Cindy's the most wonderful human being you'll ever meet. Yeah,
still his wife.
Still his wife, and so that was that. But I know what I was going to say. When I got pregnant with Katie, I was thinking about getting my PhD, but Katie was more important to me than the PhD. And so a friend of mine had actually left graduate school. He'd finished graduate school. He was a lot older too. In fact, he's the friend who introduced me to Ronnie. And he had gone to the State Department of Louisiana, was working in the State Department of Education. And he contacted me because they had a shortage of school psychologists. And I actually majored in clinical psych, not educational or school psych. And so he said, "Would you consider going to help us out in one of the rural areas?" And I was like, "You got to get me some training." He said, "We're going to be doing lots of training for everybody." The state of Louisiana was like under this huge lawsuit because they'd sent a lot of students with special needs to Texas.
Shocking.
So anyway, that's how I became a school psychologist. They called me and asked me to do that. But it really, really worked because at one time when I was exploring what job I should look at, I looked at the I'm actually, I think, a natural teacher. And,
for sure.
When I looked at the curriculum for teaching them, I was like, shoot, I don't want to major in this. It was just so like mind-numbingly limited, and especially at that level of school that I was in. As
someone who has a master's in education, I can tell you, you were spot on in your assessment. You learned absolutely nothing.
Well, and I think you certainly can teach teaching, but you also, I think, the true gifted people, it's just
you can't teach anyone how to teach. It's intuitive. It's a gift.
Yeah, it is a gift.
Anyway.
So anyway, school psych actually fit me really pretty well in the end. And so, and at that point in Louisiana, I had you were this counselor, you were the social worker, you were the intervention person, you were also trying to figure out what was going on with somebody. So it was a pretty challenging job. And it worked. It paid the bills. I had health insurance and, and
you're a single mom. You needed a steady job.
Yeah. And I worked for a year in that school system in the rural area. And then somebody in Ruston, which is where Louisiana Tech is, contacted me and asked me if I would move over to their system. And I was very blessed to work with a man who had his PhD there, who had been trained by he was from the north. He wasn't from the south. He'd been trained by some amazing people in psychology. So I learned a lot from him. Amazing social worker there. I learned, who is again older, and I learned from two wonderful women who were educational assessment people, consultants. They were fantastic. And so it was just fantastic. It was just great. And, I ended up leaving there about, I think, after 2 or 3 years because it was a long drive. It's still 30 miles. So some of the people I had gone to school with had also ended up becoming school psychologists because of the need, and they were working closer to home. And they called me and said, "Come work with us." And so I went there, and that was lovely because it was a lot of the people I'd gone to graduate school with who I did have close relationships with. Let's see. I didn't say this, but I was living with Mom. We were kind of co-parenting Sean and Katie, who were my younger brother
and your daughter.
Yeah, because he's closer in age to her than he is to me, and that worked for a long time. But when you live with your mom, at least my mom, I don't know how it is living with me. With my mom, I felt like I was always doing things her way.
Yeah.
And so...
no, I definitely feel living with you it enhances who I am in a lot of ways. It doesn't detract. There's things with,
Dusting?
There's aspects of your personality that I want to, especially now that I'm an adult, that I want to, for lack of a better word, change. But not because I want to make you different. I'm not satisfied with who you am. I want you to be happier and a more satisfied and stable person. And I feel, I know you better than anyone else on the planet. And so I now, with the perspective of adulthood and having lived on my own in various places and having gone through a lot of psychology on my own and done a lot of internal healing and introspection, I can now see what I consider flaws in you that ultimately through nurture became flaws in me, and that I feel like I've done a lot of work resolving. And now I want to assist you in resolving those same flaws that originated in you. So that part of it can be not frustrating, but like, I guess a little frustrating, but only because I want to see you be a happier person. But there's also so much of the majority of what I feel are the good parts about me come directly from you. So at the same time, it's like, I want us to grow together. And so actually I feel like I'm starting to flourish under my own self-reflection that's caused, like you act as like a mirror for me to see myself. And so anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. No. You're living with your mom.
No. And I want to say what you just said about me, I also have with mom. Like you heard her over here yesterday. There's a tendency towards like hyper focusing on certain topics, or that can become negative, and then I struggle with that, and I can't seem to get. Although I do feel like there has been change there as well. It's just that I can't quite get it to change enough to make me feel like I'm my best,
right?
And I love her, and so much of what I became when we went to school together and when we lived together has to do with her. And the foundation for who all of us are is, especially the girls, I think, because we're all pretty independent. We're not dependent people. You've heard me talk about how close I am to my Aunt Shirley, but my Aunt Shirley's the product of the environment that they all came from, and she stayed within it. Mm-hmm. And she never worked, and she didn't have really outside interest. And you know, my mom is totally a different person, mm-hmm. and has, I think, given that level of truly to me and to, you know, and to other people.
That's probably a direct result of her divorcing your father.
But also, I think that's where she was before. She was definitely in charge before even.
Right. Which probably contributed to the divorce, honestly, her independence.
And my dad wasn't really, though. I don't think that was it. I think more my dad didn't feel like she loved him the same way he loved her in some ways. And anyway, but that's, I don't really know all the dynamics of that. So,
but you were living at home.
Yeah, I was living there. I had gotten to the point where I felt like I was as much of an adult as I could be living with my mom. Exactly. And I needed to move somewhere else. And so Katie and I got a townhouse in Monroe, and I just loved that place. And I was teaching already at the Methodist church just because I wanted Katie to be exposed to some degree of spirituality. It was my grandparents' church. It meant a lot to them. They were very close to Katie and loved her just so much. And, you know, even though I shouldn't know, they were horrified that I got pregnant. I think she was a great gift to them, mm-hmm. Before they passed away. And so, I did not feel comfortable, though. I still didn't fit into the social life in Louisiana and in Monroe. And so, I mean, I was friends with people individually, but with a whole group, and I didn't share the same philosophical or political views. You know, I'm sort of socialist. And so, I would take Katie to Sunday school, but I didn't have a Sunday school class for myself that I would fit into.
Right.
The lady who was actually in charge of the Sunday school there was a friend of my grandparents, and she'd known me forever. So she came to me and said, I want you to run kindergarten and preschool Sunday schools. And so I was like, oh, okay, sure. And at that point, I think Katie she probably was in kindergarten. And then, so I started teaching the kindergarten class and then running the getting the teachers and the materials and the plans for the preschool. And then when Katie was in first grade, I met your father, but I met your dad primarily through the kids. Caroline and Katie were in class together in elementary school. Oh, I'm sorry. Detail about what? Who the kids are?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. So your dad had been married before, and his first wife had borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia. It's kind of unclear. diagnostically, but she had been in and out of mental institutions, and she'd asked her dad for divorce at one point, and so they had gotten a divorce. At least this is his story. I have no idea what Julia's story would be. So
his version
it's
of it,
his version of
may
it.
not be the most accurate version.
Well, but I will say this: I do think your dad was. You know how you're kind of there are people that you're even though you're not a monogamous person, you are a loyal person in terms of the friendships, and I still think your dad was very, very still attached to Julia. I'm not sure he did the things he needed to do. In fact, I'm like 99.9% certain he had some contributing factors to Julia's lack of mental health.
Right.
He introduced her to drugs. He told me that himself. There's some things I think he did, but also I don't think he understands how to be the support system for somebody else. Mm-hmm. So what was I going to say? But I do think in his mind, he does the best that he can do. Mm-hmm. So he was still very, very attached to her. I mean, I think he would have married her again if she'd come back and said she wanted to be married, but she was, really pretty mentally unstable. So anyway, he had the 3 children, and Hugh Jr., Hugh Jr. was 8. Katie and Caroline, Katie and Caroline were 6, and then Preston was 4.5.
These are his kids.
His kids from his marriage to Julia. So at this point in time, Preston might have been 5 by this point. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Preston was in my kindergarten class. Katie and Caroline were going to first grade together, and he was supposed to be going to Sunday school. And by this, I mean, I forgot to tell you this part. Your dad would drive up every Sunday morning. He would drop them off. They would, just out in the parking lot, they would come in by themselves, and they were supposed to get themselves to Sunday school. Well, first of all, the kindergarten room was right by this door where they got dropped off. So I would grab Preston. The girls were very obedient, went on to their classroom together because they knew each other they were in the same elementary school class too. And Hugh Jr. went down the hall towards wherever his classroom was, but he was not within my, auspices, and so I wasn't really sure if he ever made it, and most of the time he didn't because he ended up wandering back down towards me. And one time I think my real first close experience with them and him, he was in the hall closet hiding. And it happened to be outside my kindergarten classroom. So I just told the preschool teacher next door, we had a sharing door. I said, I'm stepping out in the hall for a second. I opened the class door and I said, hey, what you doing? And he said, nothing. And I was like, so you going to go to class? No, they don't want me in there. I said, why don't they want you in there? Don't you know I'm the baddest boy in church? And I was like, no, I had not heard this.
This is my oldest half-brother.
Yes. And I said, well, I don't think that's probably true. And I said, you want to just come in here and hang out with your younger brother? And so that kind of started a little bit of a relationship with him. And then his dad also came in that day because your dad did come back after Sunday school was over, and he would get there in time for church, and he would grab all the kids and they would all go sit in church together.
My dad went to church?
Yeah, he was pretty religious.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm never... Yes, because he and I read the Bible together. Wow. I don't mean we read it together, like sitting next to each other. We had a Bible study plan, and so he would read it home and I would read it. We just kind of kept each other... It's like a study partner, but except in different places. Because I don't remember ever actually discussing it with him.
So you don't know if he actually read it?
Yeah, I think he did. He carried his Bible all the time. I'm serious. I think he probably was even more diligent than I was because he has a way of excluding. I mean, he can let things go on with the kids, and I would be more involved in what was happening with them. Anyway, so we started, I just remember the first time that he came, and this may have been when Hugh Jr. was in the hall. I don't know why I wouldn't have seen him earlier than that, but he came to the door to get Preston, and we had these little half doors, the top half swung open and the bottom half to keep the kids from going out. And so he came. Oh, I know why. We had 2 teachers, and so anyway, it's a whole difference. I wasn't always the person to greet the parents when they came to pick them up because we ended up combining all the classes together so teachers could go to church. Anyway, so he came one day to pick the kids up, and I just remember looking at him, and in my mind said to me, I'm going to marry this person. And I think I've told you that before. and I don't know, now with SLCA, we have these kind of self-fulfilling prophecies where you have this mindset. So perhaps just the thought itself created the event, or I don't know if it was a premonition of the event, and it was an intuitive response or whatever.
An energetic connection.
Yes. I have felt in this situation that being unable to stay married to him and being unable to continue my really the biggest, he needed
spoiler alert.
He needed some.
You got divorced eventually.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
We'll get to that in a second.
But the thing is, I think he needed someone, and I do think the kids needed someone. So I will always feel that somehow I didn't fulfill my part of whatever bargain was happening at that moment. Whatever.
It was God reaching down to you to tell you that you need to procreate with this man in order to create me.
Well, that could, and Morgan. That may be.
Mostly me.
I feel that there's equal value in both of you. I do think so, and I do still think I had a small impact on Caroline and Bresson, but maybe in Hugh. I mean, in terms of, because they've talked about just living with me for that short period of time, and just philosophical changes even for that period of time. But I sure wish I could have just continued that. Maybe I wouldn't have been able to be an effective parent, though, with 6 people.
Yeah.
No, I mean, not.
So let's get into how the 6 people came about.
So
you met him at Sunday school.
I met him at Sunday school.
You had a premonition that this is the man I'm going to marry.
Yes, but we didn't go out then. I lived in Garnier Apartments, which were but they were all townhouses. So you had an upstairs and a downstairs. They were like separate condo townhouses. Very beautiful open area. There was some older people who lived in there, and there were some younger people who lived in there. It was kind of a mixed community because older people might have lived there for a long time. Anyway, your dad had a store called Specialty Sound, and there was a lady there who's, I don't know, maybe like 80, and she had been a customer of the store for a long time. It sold videos, but also, I mean, it mostly sold music equipment and not CDs, vinyl and things like that. He also had like sound studios, and he had let people cut records and things like that. He'd been very active all over the Southeast. Anyway, this 80-year-old woman needed stamps. And so she called your daddy and asked him to bring her stamps. And so he did. And see, there are these pieces of your dad, because he really would do anything for anyone as long as it fit within his schedule. He wasn't the kind of like, he had these things that now in retrospect, I think maybe he couldn't let go that he had to do, like go put the bank deposit in every day. He had to run every morning. He had certain routines that he had to follow.
Sounds exactly like me.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So now the gift of you, and other than the obvious gift of your spiritual nature, has been some insight into what was going on with your dad. And had I been able to have you first, because too, Allie, I love you so completely that it just who you are is amazing to me. Regardless, I just don't want anything that you do to be painful to you. But then through pain we grow. But now I have a greater understanding of your dad, and I didn't understand at the time. I had no idea what was going on with him, because really I was so wrapped up in the overwhelming thing of when we did finally get together of having. Because, jumping to the thing, he and I, at that time when he took the stamps to the lady, he passed by my townhouse, and I happened to be outside, and he, with Katie, and he stopped and we talked, and then he went and gave her stamps, and he came back and he just hung out with me for a while. And now I'm thinking in retrospect, where were his children? Who was taking care of them? But probably your grandparents. And then he asked me out, and we started dating from that point on, and we did date for a long time. And again, I got pregnant. Now I'm beginning to think now with SLCA that I have in my mind these desires for kids, and they get manifested. You keep
referencing SLCA. SLCA is the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta, and it's
New Thought.
It's new. Yeah, it's what is known as like the New Thought movement. It's a religious philosophy, but essentially based more on energetic connections rather than your typical Judeo-Christian belief in like strict manifestations of God and things like that. Anyway, that's an aside, but you keep referencing it.
Well, it's the belief that if you have strong desires, that you're able to manifest those desires.
A core philosophy being a core component of the philosophy being that essentially we're able to manifest our own lives through our thought, manifest things in our lives through our thought.
And so I can say to you clearly that the thing I struggle with within this philosophy is I don't have clear desires, and it sort of bothers me when I see that other people seem to have clear, especially material kind of desires. So I can tell you that my only life defining clear desire from childhood was to be a mother.
Yeah, you manifested it.
And so, yes.
Absolutely, and I think probably the audience is getting an idea of this over the past 40 minutes in this podcast, but also I can attest to this. You're certainly not the type you would think to become pregnant.
I can remember someone saying
prior to getting married.
No.
Like, this is not your personality.
Except
you're not the promiscuous type.
Mm-mm.
But yet it happened twice, right?
Well, and I didn't take birth control. I always used a reliance on the male person using a condom. And also, I was very, very careful. I've always been very regular, so I could always calendar when I could get pregnant and not pregnant. And so with Katie, there was literally an event that occurred after we had broken up that had not occurred for months. And so, I mean, that's an explanation. With you, I'm really not exactly sure how it occurred, because based on what I was doing,
could it have been an immaculate conception?
You look a lot like your dad. Of course, things just don't. That's not a very reliable way to do, as science proves. The more reliable ways to do other things. I couldn't take.
As your daughter now diligently works in that field.
Well, then will not ever right.
Perhaps a direct result
of me. But
poor choices in your 20s, 30s, I guess, at that point, right? Because by the time you got pregnant with me, you were in your early 30s, right?
I was 30. Yeah, 30 was I. Just prior to 31. I got pregnant when I was 30, and you were born right before my 31st birthday.
Right around my age. I'm about to turn 29.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yes.
Got pregnant prior to getting married to my father.
Yes. And
took us through that.
And your dad was, so when your dad was not like all that excited, obviously.
Oh, shocking.
and that was not going to be his choice of things to have occur.
Did he want to get an abortion?
Yeah, I'm sure he did. I don't know. I can't remember if he ever really said that to me, because I think he probably knew pretty much. He probably said, "What are you going to do?" or something like that.
Get this taken care of.
And I was like, "I'm going to have a baby." I mean, So I kind of threw the ball back in his court, and he did not respond. He was. I think he was traumatized because he already had 3 kids, and he didn't know what to do. I mean, he just couldn't make a decision. So it was. So I think you were conceived in May. And so I said, you know what, you got till about August to make a decision, because I'm going back to, I always have summer off.
Make a decision about what?
What his involvement's going to be, and whether or not we were going to get married.
Oh, yeah.
Because at that point, I had the kids all the time, except when I was at work, I was taking care. We lived. Your daughter and his kids. Well, I mean, I would go over there after school. Mimi and Papa would be there if I was at work, and then I would relieve them. And, I actually even slept over at his house sometime, but again, this is quite truthful. He and I never actually slept together. Uh-huh. Even when we would travel together, I made him sleep with Preston and Hugh, and I slept with Caroline and Katie. The only time we ever had sex was when Katie went to see her dad, and Caroline and Hugh went to hang out at Mimi and Papa's down at the plantation. So I was always there, and I'm sure people in the community felt that we were sleeping together at his house with the children present. But I feel so strongly about kids that was not happening. He had a big bed that all the kids slept in together, and I think he piled in with them, and then Katie and I would sleep in the other bedroom. Just because I was at that point, Mimi was letting me. I was helping get them to school and getting homework. I was their mom at that point. So when August rolled around, he still hadn't made a decision. So I said, okay, that's fine. I've got to go to my schools and talk to them and see, because back then, probably legally they couldn't have fired me. But I wanted to give people I just wanted people to know, and I wanted to give them I volunteered to resign.
For being an unmarried pregnant woman? Mm-hmm. Jesus.
Mm-hmm. So no one took me up on that. And in retrospect, well, I think most people had respect for me, but also they might not have felt like they could legally, even though, but anyway, so I just continued working. And I think as it got closer to your birth, then I think your dad started saying, we better get married. And I was like, never mind. I've already gone, I'm already pregnant. Everybody knows about it. I don't want to do it. If he'd been able to say, yes, I want to get married in that, because I was pretty certain about what I wanted with regard to everyone.
You'd have been down to get married.
Oh yeah. Because I love the kids. I just and 6 kids in that situation, or 5 kids at that point, would not have been undaunting, because Mimi and Papa are around, even though I didn't agree with them about things. And in some ways, Mimi was very controlling.
Mimi and Papa are my father's parents.
Yeah. They would have been very helpful. At least I would have had somebody when I needed some physical help with stuff. But anyway, he didn't feel comfortable doing that. So we just went ahead I just went ahead and had you, as you know, your birth was pretty traumatic. You never wanted to leave me. We had to force you out 2 weeks late. And so the placenta abrupted and you experienced, oxygen deprivation, which ulcerated your intestinal lining, and you had an APGAR of 1 when you were born. And
an APGAR being?
On a scale of 0 to 10, where 10s should be what most babies are 8, 9, 10. You were a 1. That's based on reflexes, breathing, color, things like that.
So a small step away from being dead, essentially.
You looked dead when you were born.
How did I look dead?
You were totally limp. You were purple. You just looked like a dead child. You just looked like
a stillbirth.
Looked like a really cold dead child. Yeah.
So what happened?
I don't even know why you got a 1. And now I'm thinking, what?
Should have got the 0.
No, there was some. You must have had some. Well, I probably had a heartbeat.
I saw it in my eyes.
Yeah.
They saw the fight in my eyes.
And then they give you 5 minutes and they do it again, and then you got a 3. So they had gotten some respiration out of you. So anyway, and also I was taking care of my grandmother because my grandfather had passed away, and my grandmother and grandfather.
Wait. What happened real quick at that birth? How was I not dead?
Well, when the oxygen, so the reason your intestinal tract ulcerated was when the placenta abrupted, then you were deprived of oxygen. Okay, let me go prior to your birth. When I'm in labor, I was in labor, and all the nurses. Your dad had to go put a bank deposit in the bank and had to go to the store, so he left because he was there with me, and I was being the labor was being induced. I was on a drip. The nurses all went to dinner. It's Louisiana. Literally, there was no one on floor. The doctor was out at a restaurant with his wife, awaiting them to call him and tell him to come in. And fortunately for me, I worked with a woman named Teresa, and her cousin Judy was one of my best friends. And Judy was in nursing school, and they came up to the hospital. Once Teresa got off work, they came up together. And they walked in and they were talking to me, and I couldn't even breathe. The contractions were so intense and so severe. And Judy looked over. They had a fetal monitor on your scalp, vaginally. And Judy looked over and she said, "Oh my God, his heart rate's, 40. And she ran just because she knew enough to know. And she ran down the hall and grabbed a nurse. And they just disconnected everything, started wheeling me to the delivery room. I guess somebody at the station, because we didn't have cell phones. Somebody was calling the doctor, and he was close enough. Again, Monroe, it's not that big, that by the time I got in there, he was coming. Maybe he was on his way. Anyway, he got there pretty fast, as fast as they were getting me in prepped and into the delivery room. But I literally remember seeing his arms go into the blue
blanket, tarp.
No, the thing that his
his scrubs.
Scrubs, yeah. So he's like someone's putting a mask on him. He's putting his arms through, and I've told you this. I remember hearing this incredible scream, and my detached consciousness went like, "Who is that?" And then I realized it was myself. And you would actually just come out, and there was no. They do episiotomy and everything on people to keep you from ripping, and he just kind of got to the table and grabbed you as you came out, but you were just like this limp nothing. And I could see it. And they didn't, they did that kind of shielding thing, but
so you couldn't see your dead baby.
Yeah. So anyway, that was it. Anyway, that was just a real traumatic thing. But you stayed in for 10 days. You couldn't hold down formula. I kept begging them to let me breastfeed you.
Where was I?
You were in NICU, intensive care.
Uh-huh.
They had you tied down. You were a very, very big baby. You were just half ounce shy of 10 pounds. The babies that were in NICU were mostly, 2, 3, 1 pound babies that really didn't even look like little babies.
And there's like this giant.
And you were a giant. You really didn't fit in. They've actually changed now, because having seen Elliot and my grandchild, in the NICU, they've changed the beds. The beds are much different and bigger and things now. But the bed that they put you in is a little plastic container kind of thing. You were really too big for. You could put your arms and feet outside of it when you got strong. They put an IV in you. They blew oxygen on you. They didn't want to give you direct oxygen because you can do retinal detachment, stuff like that. But you would rip the IVs out. They put the IVs in multiple places. And then finally they did that femoral IV and taped your leg down and everything that has caused you to have that occluded femoral vein.
Mm-hmm. All the pronounced veins, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, finally, it was back then, nobody breastfed. It was just the most crazy thing. Anyway, finally they allowed me to breastfeed you. Once they started giving you breast milk instead of formula, you were able to hold that down. And after a few days of, eating on your own, just like when Elliot was in the hospital, they just have to see you consuming enough nourishment outside the IV. Then they let you go home. And your sister promptly dropped you on the ground, by the way.
Who, Katie?
It's my fault. I handed you to her because I couldn't get in the door of the house. And so I had her hold you and she dropped you.
As soon as I got home from the hospital?
No, not as soon, but soon after.
Did I hit my head?
Yes, your frontal lobe.
Jesus.
You hadn't had a chance since birth.
That explains a lot. All right, I'm going to pause it there because I got to pee. We're going to have to take this to a part 2 because we're almost an hour in. But that's kind of a perfect place to stop. Okay. BC and 80.
Christ or Christopher?
Ooh, I like it. BC and AC. All right, we're back. We've both urinated. We're back for the riveting part 2 of the podcast. I'm now on planet Earth. And this is an Alex-centric podcast. I really just like your thoughts on existence, which is what we're going to get into now. You've elaborated a lot on your.
I was going to say, how can this be interesting to anyone but us?
It may or may not be, but it doesn't really matter, right? And they're not paying for it. It's a free podcast to listen to it or not. But I seriously think your perspective on life and existence and the world, and like I said, when I first started out, I just wanted to start the podcast off with you just giving a little background on who you are, but you immediately got into the racial dynamics of your childhood, which is not what I asked at all. It's not like I prepped you at all for the show. I just told you to sit down and start talking. But it's that's why I want you on the show, because I think you have a very interesting perspective on existence. And yeah, we've gotten personal centric, but I also think the story of my birth is kind of interesting and things like that. And may or may not keep it in, edit it out. But let's get into now life since you've had me and have your kids. And
you want to leave Morgan out altogether?
Oh yeah, you can get into Morgan. I guess you can. She's guest number 2. She's the second guest, or I may put her as the first. She's a guest on the Youngblood University podcast as well. So yeah, very briefly, please. I was born. Morgan pops out next.
No, you were born. Well, let me just say this. I made the decision to move after you were born, about 6 weeks after you were born, because it just became too complicated. And also my grandmother was there and I was taking care of her, and she started developing pretty bad Alzheimer's. And I really just couldn't cope with Alzheimer's alone, and all the family was over here. So I made the decision to move here. We moved here. Eventually I bought a house and we moved into the house. Your dad continued to call me, pretty much every night. And finally one night, I just said, listen, we're either going to get married or please don't call anymore. I can't do this kind of sustained kind of whatever. And I said, we either have to integrate the families or we just have to make a break. And so we made the decision, badly or goodly. I don't know what right or wrong. And we met in New Orleans, which is where he was living, trying to start a business. We got married. That summer he moved all the kids over here. Everyone lived here.
At this point you'd moved to Atlanta.
Yes, I'm sorry. I moved to Atlanta. That's where here is. And
after you had me, right? It was like you had me 6 months later. Shit wasn't going well between me and my dad. And
between me and your dad.
Excuse me. You had me about 6 months later. Things were not going well between my dad and you. It was
really more to Mimi, that Mimi had Alzheimer's.
My grandma?
I needed to.
Or your grandma?
Yes. And so the whole family made the decision that she needed to move here. And I was like, if we're going to move her there, I'm just going to move Katie, me, and Allie. And I'm going to make a break with Hugh. And
my dad is Hugh.
Your dad. And so then that didn't break it though, because we continued to talk to each other. And then we decided to try again.
So you're in Atlanta with
you and Katie living in this house.
You and your two children at this point, and he's still in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you decided to get the band back together in a big way.
Yes.
And so headed off to New Orleans.
Got to New Orleans, and I won't go into all that's a long story in and of itself, but your dad wasn't totally prepared to even have that go off without it.
You got married by like the Voodoo Queen or something,
no,
right?
He wanted to get married by the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans, but we had a friend named Jim Cormier who had actually been an assistant minister in Monroe at the Methodist Church where we met each other, and he married us in the afternoon by ourselves. And your dad was supposed to get witnesses, but I think he was too embarrassed to even tell people I was flying in to get married, so he hadn't done anything with regard to that. We picked up. So I was like, oh my God, I've flown all over here. I've left two children, and I never left you guys, like even at night for a movie. And to go for the whole weekend was, to me traumatic. And so we passed some girls who were from a sorority at Tulane, or not Tulane, whatever the other school is. And they were doing a car wash. And so we pulled in and I said, hey, if we make a donation to your sorority, will you guys come be our witnesses for our wedding? And they were like so excited. Two girls jumped in our car, went with us, and didn't know us, and we drove back down and they were near the church, and we drove to the church, and they were the witnesses and signed the marriage certificate. We drove them back and gave them a donation, and we actually had a wonderful.
Go ahead.
We actually had a wonderful weekend. He had planned lots of great activities for my weekend with him. And he had lots of restaurants, and we went to hear a band. This little kid played the trumpet, like 8 years old. We had all that. But with regard to the actual event of getting married, he had done nothing except he had gotten the wedding license.
It sounds like it was meant to last.
Well, it's just your dad now that I know in retrospect. And it was also that part of your dad's personality. I'm so much the opposite. Like, I'm the worrywart who doesn't take any risk, who does tries to take care of everybody and puts everything in line and kind of subjugates my needs to everyone else's. Your dad's the opposite of that. And it was kind of like a break, like going to the amusement park for the weekend or with him whenever I was with him. The problem was when he came and became part of my actual day-to-day life, I felt I was afraid. And your dad, that book that you have, the fear, Love is Letting Go of Fear.
Oh yeah. He
said that to me. It was a very, very, really apt, one of the most insightful things anyone's ever said. He said, you're afraid. And I was. With your dad, I was always afraid. There was monetary fear.
Maybe that was a warning sign.
No, not when we were dating. I'm talking about after he came to live here. Because he drank too much. He poor thing, he really tried. He applied to so many jobs. He just always been his own businessman. And one especially sound went down the tubes, which had a lot to do with the commitments he made to Julia when she was ill.
His previous wife. Yeah.
Yes. He really tried very hard with regard to providing financial support, but he didn't no idea how to be a paternal support. His parents had always done it, and I did not realize how little he understood. And so it was just like having a really big another child when he lived here.
So after y'all got married, he moved to Atlanta.
He moved to Atlanta, brought Caroline, Hugh, and Preston.
His 3 kids, yeah. Mm-hmm. Y'all packed into this house.
Yes. I thought the boys might want to live in the basement like you. I thought it would be kind of cool, but they were scared to live in the basement. So your dad and I moved to the basement, and I put speakers down there because This
is not a big house, by the way. And you had
no.
5 kids at this time?
5 kids and the 2 of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the girls took the master bedroom. The boys took the other bedroom. Those 2 bedrooms are pretty much the same size. And you had the little bedroom because you had to be...
Yeah, I mean, what is there in this house? 2 bedrooms, like kind of a half guest bedroom, like essentially a glorified closet, and the basement that is the size of another bedroom?
Mm-hmm. And he took the big closet that's now in the basement.
The walk-in closet in the basement?
That was his office.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had how many people in it? 7 people in a 3-bedroom house?
Mm-hmm. but I mean...
This would be 1.5
spacious
1.5
to many
baths?
people across the world.
No, 2 baths. 2.5 baths.
2 baths, yeah.
Yeah, yes, true, yes. Relatively speaking, on a global scale, you guys lived in a palace, for sure.
Absolutely.
That's a great perspective.
We were totally happy. I just was expecting more. I needed more parental support, and that was an issue for us. And your dad just needed me to take care of everybody. And then when everybody went to bed, come take care of him.
Right.
and so it was tiring. And then, of course, I get pregnant in November with Morgan.
A theme.
And that let me say this. Morgan was probably the only time I probably wasn't manifesting a child because I had lots of them, and there was I don't remember feeling any strong desire to add to the number of people in the house.
Yes, as she has always been her entire life, Morgan was and is entirely unwanted.
Well, she was not unwanted, but she was a surprise.
Right. Well, they were all surprises.
Well,
this one had a little less fanfare.
Yes, and the only one legitimate, actually.
The only non-bastard child, ironically enough.
Well, Hugh and Caroline Preston aren't either.
Of your children. Your children is the only legitimate child.
Of my child.
But unwanted. It just never was a perfect situation.
But anyway, that made me probably hormonal, less patient, and... so less able to deal with the things that I need to deal with regard to your dad. The kids, I don't feel like I do remember one time getting really mad at all of them when they had really messed up the downstairs. And I think what they used to call it something. I can't remember anywhere. I remember yelling at all of them, if you don't come pick up your stuff, everything I put in this basket's getting thrown away. Because there was, 5 sets of people's belongings in the house.
Yeah, children's stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
You said dealing with your dad's stuff. Get into that. What was the stuff you had to deal with my dad? What kind of stuff did you have to deal with that wasn't...
You really want to go into all this detail, or you want to do other things?
It's up to you.
Well, I don't know, because I don't really want to think. Your dad's an alcoholic. So there were issues related to his drinking. And that was part of the issue. But alcoholism's a multifaceted problem. Your dad drank too much. Your dad drove and drank. Your dad got stopped by the police who brought him home to me. They didn't arrest him. He drove, I would realize after work we'd be going to a restaurant that he was driving drunk, and I'd have to make him pull over, and because he was drinking, I guess, on the way home from work. There were lots of dynamics, but it's a 2-3 as I said, multifaceted issue. Because when you're married to an alcoholic, you are also a codependent personality. And by that, I started trying to control everything. And my own anxiety wants me to organize the world and try to make everything right. And I worry about everything anyway. And when you add that into the dynamic, that brought out the worst of my personality. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I was getting mad at your dad too. I was angry with him. I was angry that he didn't take care of anybody, but these are all things that he really never was able to do. I just didn't see it. Mm-hmm. So I need to say to you, your dad is not a bad person. Your dad is just your dad. And he's not, he always just say, no harm intended, no harm meant, no harm intended, or something like that. He really wouldn't ever hurt anybody. And he would give you anything if he had it. And well, I don't want to say that because he wasn't like he just, or overly, but he just wasn't. He would ask people for stuff too, and he would kind of be presumptuous about people. But I think that presumptuousness occurred because he was willing for people to do that to him too. Mm-hmm. So anyway, he's the one. I think. Sorry. He made the decision to move away, and he made the decision to move away from me without telling me, because I think he knew I wouldn't go. But I think his intent was always that we would follow, that he would leave that summer that he left and took Caroline, and we took Katie with him too, because he took Katie to see Ronnie for me, and you stayed with me because you belonged to us, and he took the kids to see their grandparents. But he had made arrangements with your grandparents to stay there, and the plan he'd worked out with your grandmother was that they were going to build us a home to live on the plantation. But they didn't consult with me. They didn't talk to me. But I was pretty mad at him at that point. And I also was very pregnant with Morgan. And I think he just thought if he went ahead and did it, it would kind of force my hand and I would have to go. Mm-hmm. And I've said this to you, that was always almost like a Sophie's Choice kind of situation where because by not going, I did not get to have Caroline, Preston, and Hugh. Mm-hmm. And I left them with your dad and your grandparents. But I couldn't go there. Mm-hmm. Monroe, and they did.
This is not even Monroe. This is Columbia, which is 30 minutes south of Monroe.
In a plantation where the people of color couldn't come through the front door.
Yeah. I mean, this is in the 90s.
I mean, it was crazy.
Late 80s.
It was Morgan was born in 1990.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just couldn't.
It's a tiny farming town, and tiny, doesn't even do it justice. It's in the middle of nowhere. There are literally slave houses still on the ground of this cotton plantation. It's literally stuck at the time, 1990. It was essentially still in 1890. It really is, and it hasn't changed that much to this day.
And it's horrible. And so I will always feel that I abandoned them, except I know I didn't totally, I didn't have any legal custody to them. They had already lived there. I didn't feel like I sort of changed their life to bring them here by having them go back. They were just going back to where they had been. But if I'd had any recourse to get them, I would have had. I just didn't want your dad back here at that point. I would have taken them, but I couldn't go to there. I couldn't go live with Mimi and Papa. I will always. That will just always be in my mind, You
feel a sense of guilt that you abandoned the three of his kids.
Yeah, I didn't. And I know rationally I didn't abandon them, but I didn't go get them. But also, I was when your dad left, I was 7.5 months pregnant with Morgan, or 8 months pregnant with Morgan. Morgan was born July 31st, but so anyway, 7.5 months. I literally couldn't actually travel. And then after she was born, I was pretty overwhelmed with Morgan, you, and Katie. And so it was never like I even made a conscious decision to not go get them or not to have them or whatever. It's just that events that they were there. He made that move. I never made that move to go there. It was just a sort of a passive thing that happened where I was here, he was there. And by not taking any action, this is what ended up happening.
Right.
But I'll always remember Caroline calling me and saying, "Tommy, you told me if Daddy wouldn't bring me home, you'd come get me." Mm-hmm. And I didn't go get her. But I mean, you know me, I would violate the 7.5 months if I thought like she was in danger. But at the same time, I was like, I didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And so by not knowing what to do, which is really my biggest flaw, I think, as a person, is when I don't know for sure what to do, not taking action. Mm-hmm. It's the decisiveness that I'm wake up after affirming in myself every day, try to figure out what the right thing to do is and do that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Morgan was born. Our greatest gift. Anyway.
So yeah, you're stuck in Atlanta now with 3 kids, with Morgan being born July 1990. You're in Atlanta.
And your dad's unable to help financially. He really isn't. He has no source of income other than, your grandparents.
So you are a straight up single parent by yourself on what you're a school psychologist, but it's essentially a teacher's salary with 3 kids and no financial support from my dad. You did have a little bit of financial support from Katie's father. It was a different father, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
He always sent like $300 or something.
Right.
$350, I think, at the top.
So get into that. How was it? How'd you feel then? And how was it for the next 18 years raising the 3 of us by yourself?
You've seen Kate. You've seen being with Kate and Amelia. It's hard being a parent, but putting the needs of other people ahead of my own is just something natural for me. And everybody will say things like, "Oh, you were such a good parent," and stuff like that. I still have to reiterate to everybody, the 3 most selfish acts I ever did, and by selfish, I mean the things I wanted the most, were the 3 of you. So I put you in this world without a legitimate other parent. So that was a selfish act on my part. I don't know that I consciously did it, but whatever subjective that I now believe was there, that you're the manifestation of what I most wanted in the world. And then my commitment to you is beyond anything. So you can say, "Oh, my mom was a good mom." I couldn't be anything else.
It's okay. Everyone cries in the Wood University podcast. Literally every single guest has cried.
You are the most important things that exist. And the things I've learned from you, from your struggles, from your triumphs, have made me better at every facet of my being. I'm a better psychologist. I'm a better parent. I'm a better person. I've always understood, and somehow I think when I'm with children, I can feel almost like the inside of them. But having my own has expanded that reality. So I was exhausted being a single parent, but I thrived on being a parent. I wish that I was the kind of parent Katie and Tyson are in the terms of how they share it all, because I think I was too focused on doing it all myself.
Yeah, that would be nice. You're referencing Katie and Tyson, my older sister, and her current husband, and their 3 kids now. Yeah, it would be, yeah. I think we all, everyone wishes they could be that type of parent, but they're in a stable marriage with a stable source of income in suburban Chicago. Yeah, it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, but there's a point too, Allie. I can remember just even when I was dating Ashley and he wanted to get married, I can remember thinking, I'm just doing this myself now. I don't know how I'm going to be able to integrate another person into this. Also, there was intellectually, I was like, I'm not sure I should try to integrate it into my children's lives. So, but it's not just the integration into your own life. It was also the integration into my own life. This is like a fine balance, and I'm not sure I can. But I think it's a place that I need to grow as a person. In fact, I think you and Morgan coming back as adults has actually really, if you think about it, except for my mother, this is the longest, the most healthy adult relationships I've had, because I didn't have roommates when I was in college. I was living with my grandparents and my mom. Mm-hmm. I've never lived with another human being except for when Ronnie and I semi-lived together, and then your dad lived here, but I wasn't focused on your dad. I was focused on children. So,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so let's talk about other stuff.
Nah, this is what we're talking about. I'd like to, before we move on from that, I would like you to get into a little bit more about being a single parent. Like, how did that develop from Morgan's birth up through high school in terms of the difficulty? What were highs and lows. Like, how dark did it ever get really dark? Did you ever think about, am I going to be able to do this?
Yeah.
Did you ever think about, you touch briefly on dating other people? Like how?
Yeah. I mean, dating was just not I think it's why now I don't know what my own desires and wants are, because everything was, mom has pretty strong desires and needs. And so I was I've always supported those. Sean was like my first child, my younger brother. So I've been conscious of those. And then when you guys were here, those needs were always present. I also just seemed to feel responsible for the needs of everybody. So, I mean, you remember when we would go places, I would include everybody in the neighborhood because I felt bad if we left anybody out. So, there are times when I drove home from work thinking I can't do this anymore. If I just maybe veer the car into this bridge and go flying over, it'll all be over. But then,
what we would have done, the three of us would have done.
That was the next thought. Who would take care of them? And who would take care of them the way I would want them to be taken care of? And there was no such person that I could define. Mm-hmm. And so I stayed on the road. Mm-hmm. There are times when I went to the basement and would do laundry and just kind of cry over the laundry. But I didn't want you guys to know that. There's one time I can remember where I was yelling. I went down to the basement to yell at your dad because I knew he had some level of income then and I needed some help and I really wasn't sure I was going to be able to make bills. And I had gone into what used to be the office is now the closet in the basement, the furthest corner of the house. And I was just yelling at him, which is totally useless. And I came back out and you were little, like 3, 4, standing at the top of the stairs, just looking at me in horror. And I remember just hanging the phone up and thinking, I'm never going to have this conversation again. We're just going to make it on our own. And I hung it up because it almost also with your dad, it became like his interaction with me. And almost like this way he got my attention. Mm-hmm. So I was like, that's it.
I'm doing this by myself.
Yeah.
How did you financially?
Well, he did help at one point. There was a point where he was given the title of the French translator in Louisiana by his friend who was
and he was the French translator for the state of Louisiana. And he doesn't speak French.
And he doesn't speak French.
This is how Louisiana politics works.
Exactly. So I won't name the people, but they live in Columbia. And the father of your dad's friend had been governor of Louisiana at one point. And then the friend was actually Secretary of State of Louisiana. And he was just trying to help your dad out. He knew he needed some income. So he appointed your dad the French translator for Louisiana for visitors, and your dad didn't speak French, and he received a certain amount of money every month, and it was not a huge amount of money. I mean, I think it was like $178 or something crazy. And your dad turned that check over to me. That's when he first started sending child support.
That didn't last very long.
It lasted for as long as he had that job, and then he continued it because he'd gotten Specialty Sound back off the ground a little bit, not as an official building anymore, but as a business that he did installed sound systems for people, really he just hired people to do it and he supervised. But and there was a point too where, remember when we wrecked a van, we rolled a van down the mountain?
That's a whole nother podcast. We rolled a van down a mountain. I don't know how we're all alive.
Yeah. I called your dad after that and said, I'm going to have more money because I'm going to have a car note now. And so he actually came up with half of the car note for that too. So he paid me, I don't know, it increased to like 300 and something then. He's tried to, I literally think his problem is he just doesn't make any money. And he spends too much when he does make any because he does engage still in this party lifestyle. But I don't think he's not like a kind of person who spends a lot of, he's just like, really and truly in terms of material possessions, he has things at his parents, but he's not like a person who buys a lot of stuff. He just likes to drink, eat, and.
Yeah, but I mean, when you have 2 children, 5 children, and actually we'll get into that when I go to interview him next week. When you have these responsibilities.
Yes, I know.
You have to change your party lifestyle. But you have to cut back on the booze and the drugs and the restaurants because there are other human lives which you created which you are responsible for.
Yes. And even if you don't have children, there are things you're responsible for. And then, to me, a commitment you have to the rest of the world. But your dad's an addicted person. That's the dominating negative factor about your father. I will say, I do think that he was seeking mental relief. Because it took me a while to figure out everything that was going on with him. I didn't really realize he had OCD. I mean, he hid a lot of things. I knew
so he's having self-medicating.
Yes, I think he really sought to he was on Xanax. The medications that his friends left for, that's another thing. His doctor friends in Monroe would put prescriptions for him in their mailboxes, and he would go by and pick up the medication. And not prescribed to him. And he was getting it from more than one person, but they didn't know that. So one person might do it, another person might do it. So he had a lot of legal but illegal medications prescribed for him. But I mean, Xanax, I know, was one prescription. These were, he was dealing with anxiety. I can remember one time somebody gave him a stimulant, and he was like, oh my God, for the first time I can focus.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that, which is actually a perfect segue kind of to the next topic that I want to get into. Like, I can totally relate to having mental anguish and self-medicating. For me, I've been on, for instance, Adderall. I remember when I was first prescribed Adderall in college, it was like an entirely new aspect of existence opened up to me. Like, holy shit, this is how other people focus. Even more dramatically, when I was first prescribed an antidepressant to treat as well OCD, it was like, oh my God, this is how a calm mind feels. And as I've attempted to get off those drugs and have gotten off the Adderall and have attempted to get off the antidepressants, I've used marijuana as a replacement for the antidepressant, and it's been a functional replacement, right? It's the same. I can totally relate to that self-medication. It's like when you put this chemical input into your brain, there's a sense of calm and sense of relief that comes. Unfortunately, when you're using things like marijuana and even Adderall, which is essentially just, it's an amphetamine, essentially just low grade meth, there's side effects to those drugs. And there's even side effects to pharmaceuticals like antidepressants. Fortunately, they're not as drastic as, amphetamines or even weed or other substances. So I can totally relate to that. Me personally, the greatest struggle of my life started to occur in late elementary school, middle school, when I started to develop obsessive and compulsive behavior. And it got horrible to literally where it was affecting every single second of every single day. There wasn't some sort of compulsion, that physical compulsion behavior that I had to engage in to reduce some sort, that I know to reduce the internal anxiety that I was experiencing, or some sort of obsessive thought that was repeatedly running through my head. And that occurred all through middle school, high school, and into early college. And as it was in my early college years that I got in the antidepressants and, drastically altered my life, and I was finally able to become a functional human being psychologically.
But think how long it took for you to be able to agree to that. Because I started trying to get that to happen when you were like 12 or 13. I guess
so
13.
Talk about that.
Well, first of all, you hid it forever. So again, let's go back to your dad, who doesn't have any of this background of people or support. So anyway, you hid it because you don't know what's happening to you. Don't you feel crazy?
You feel absolutely insane, right? And I was very successful all through my childhood, academically and athletically. I was
socially?
I was always at the top of my class athletically. I was always on the best sports teams. I always had, plenty of friends and didn't have any problems with girls. And so then it was all of a sudden, I felt like I had my shit together and things were going really well. And all of a sudden you start to hit adolescence and, things are still going well in all those areas, but all of a sudden, you feel like you're not in control of your own mind. And that's exactly that's exactly what it feels like. You're no longer in control of your own mind. Your mind is spinning out of control, is going all of these different directions. You're obsessing over every single thing. And the only thoughts that you can have, it's like this constant underpinning. And of every one of your thoughts that you have during the day, that anyone has, the underpinning is these obsessions about everything. Everything. Did I tie my shoes the right way? Did I leave the oven on when I left the house? Did I lock the door when I left the house? Just constantly 24 hours a day, every single second, even when you're dreaming, during your dreams, when you're engaging in dreams, when like maybe you're flying through the sky, you're like having to touch the clouds in a certain way, or like turn around when you're flying and go back and touch the clouds. So there's literally no respite at all. And it got to the point after like 3 or 4 years, probably in like 8th grade, I remember it was the first time where I was like, I considered suicide. It's like, I can't deal with this anymore. It was an option of, am I going to, in my mind, in my sick mind at the time, it was, I have two options. I can either continue living this way in kind of psychological anguish and a mental hell in perpetuity for the rest of my life, or what I thought would be non-existence, right? So it's either anguish existence or non-existence. And honestly, when you're in that kind of mental torment, it's an easy decision. Non-existence is much better than anguish existence. And so I think that, multiple times throughout late middle school and high school, I never attempted suicide, but it was definitely a very intensive thought exercise of weighing the pros and cons, going through the decision-making process of whether I am going to take my own life, and then trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to go about doing this in like essentially the cleanest way possible, where it's like I'm affecting the least amount of people and like literally like the least amount of cleanup. Like I don't have access to a firearm. Like how do I go about doing this? I want to make sure it's done right. I don't want to be left, alive and even worse off afterward. And throughout my, post-college life into my early 20s, and even as recently as 1 year ago, year and a half ago, as I've attempted to get off the antidepressants, that anxiety and that, it's really not depression in the classical sense, right? It's not because I'm depressed about life. It's the lack of control of your own mind, right? It's not this depressive state where like, woe is me, or like everything is gray, there's no point to existence. That's not it at all. It's like my mind is running out of control. I can't control my own thoughts. There's this like demon taking over my head. I'd rather just end that altogether, and the only way you can see to end it is by taking your own life, than have to live every day like this. And I've experienced that thought as recently as a year ago, 10 months ago, when I've been off the antidepressants. And, it's been a goal of mine throughout my adult life, post-college, to be able to handle this mental disorder without pharmaceutical medication, because I don't entirely trust them. But every attempt I've made thus far has left me back into a near suicidal state. And the only thing that I've found to bring some sense of tranquility to my mind, if I'm not on the SSRIs, the antidepressants, is smoking weed. And that's not like something I want to be a staple part of my everyday existence. And so, I've returned back to psychiatric help and getting back on the medication over the last 7 to 10 months, and things have stabilized and I feel better than I ever have. So talk about that. Talk about what it was like to kind of see that develop. And as you said, I was hiding it, and I certainly was all throughout middle school to high school. I know you would notice things, and like my closest friends would notice things, like little quirks. Like I'd always have to go back and check to make sure the door was locked, or like it would take me forever to like get ready for soccer, football practice, especially football with like all the equipment you have to put on. There's so many routines I would have to go through in order to get it on. I was always the last one out on the field, right? Because I had to do all these things. And so people would notice these quirks, but I was certainly never admitted it, certainly never sought help until like my sophomore year of college.
And you're always cool. So everybody just accepted it as you. And they might even thought it was kind of non-compliance on your part.
Right. Because I've always had this little contrarian streak, and, a little bit of trouble with an issue with authority. Like I was never a bad kid getting in trouble in school. But I always did like to like buck the rules a little bit and be a little contrarian.
You're your own person.
Right. Be my own person, a sense of independence. So yeah, there was probably a thought from people that were close to me that like, oh, he's just being different or whatever. But no, it was like I was in a state of despair. And like I said, even throughout high school, like I certainly wasn't as successful academically or athletically as I could have been. But, I was, relatively speaking, I was successful in all these areas, and socially as well. I had plenty of friends and, girlfriends here and there. It was never an issue. But behind the scenes, man, it was just anguish. So talk about what that was like, your development of kind of having a little bit of realization that something was going on with me, your thought process as it was going on during, kind of that decade span, and then how do you reflect on it now?
I don't think I really realized you had OCD until that evening when you were doing your algebra homework at this table in the dining room. The only things I might have noticed before that was that you would flick the lights on and off sometimes, especially by the front door when we left. I know I've noticed you checking the doorknob, but I just thought it was kind of something that was happening as you grew up, and you've just been always a very responsible person. I would say Katie was always more like an only child personality.
My older sister.
Yeah. Yes, and you were more. I just feel like you tried to take care of Morgan. Then in some sense, I think you even tried to start taking care of us a little bit. But anyway, that evening I was cooking dinner in the kitchen, which is just 10 feet behind this table. You were in an advanced curriculum, so you guys were all, those of you who were in this curriculum were being asked to do high school algebra for a high school algebra credit in 7th grade, which was creating a lot of stress for everybody in the first place. So you always did your homework at this table, and you said, Mom, I can't get this problem written down or something. And I said, okay, hold on just a second. And I turned off the stove and came in here to help you, thinking you didn't understand how to solve the problem. And I looked down, and you had on your piece of notebook paper, you had written the number 1. And instead of just on one line of the paper, you had written it pretty much covered almost 2 lines, and you had done it like about 20 times, and then you'd circled it about 20 times, and then you'd written 1 again and done the same thing. And about 2/3 of the way down the paper, the number 1 was written a number of times, and you'd also finally started the problem towards the bottom, but had maybe written 5x or something. And I just wanted, I think I've said this to you, I just wanted to throw up because I knew instantaneously. I had no even suspicion until that moment. And then I was like, and I didn't even know. I mean, it's one of those. There have been so many moments in your lives where I've had to kind of subjugate everything I was feeling and try not to let anything out to show you guys, because I felt panic stricken, and I didn't want you to feel that way. And so I just remember saying, "What's the problem?" And literally, like, "What's the problem? What's the math problem?" And so you just told me, and I said, I was like, "You don't know how to do?" "No, I did. I just can't write it." I said, "Well, let me see you try." And you couldn't get the number written down. I said, okay, hey, just stand up. Let me sit down. And so I just started writing for you. And I said, here, you just tell me what you want me to write. And you solved every single math problem on that homework assignment in your head. You knew you could tell me what each step was. You could do the computations in your head. We wrote the whole thing. I remember writing a little note to your teachers. Hey, I was having trouble writing tonight. I wrote it for him. And then the next day I called your school and said, I need a meeting, because, I needed to know what they were seeing. They weren't seeing anything. That's when I became extremely aware. Again, this is where I get personal insight for jobs too, that teachers really don't notice things. If not everybody doesn't.
I was also making a very concerted effort to
hide it.
And that was 7th grade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember right after that, you took me to see a psychologist,
mm-hmm.
and even the psychologist's office, I denied that
mm-hmm.
really anything
mm-hmm.
was going on, and I even ran out of the psychologist's office.
You did, yeah, you
because I was so ashamed of what was going on. It was at that time, like I said, I'd been successful in all areas of my life, and then all of a sudden it's like, fuck, like, am I really not in control of my own mind? Can I really not dress myself in the morning? Which, like, it was a struggle to dress myself in the morning. Can I really not complete my algebra homework? Like academically, the content was easy as hell. And I knew that, but I was like, can I really not get the numbers down on paper? It's like, I can't admit this. I knew it myself, but I can't admit this to the outside world. And it didn't stop in 7th grade. It went all through high school. I didn't read a single book or chapter from 8th grade until my freshman year of college. Not a single book. because it was impossible for me to read a page because there are so many compulsions that had to go on from just reading a sentence. You had to read the sentence X many times. You had to swallow saliva while looking at the period. Once you finished the page, you then had to read it like whatever the number of the week was, 13, 33, 57 times, whatever arbitrary OCD aspect was manifesting itself that day, made it impossible to complete any academic assignment. We're talking about being in AP classes, getting college credit. And I passed all these classes. But I don't know.
But you weren't making straight A's anymore.
No. I went all of a sudden from making, straight A's to like, I remember I got a C in that, I think that algebra class in 7th grade. And that was like the big red flag. Like, what the fuck is going on? How is he getting a C? I remember I struggled to pass algebra 2 freshman year because the same thing, I couldn't get the problems written down. And it wasn't until freshman year where I made, and I'll get into this in a different episode, where I made like concerted mental effort on a daily basis to kind of grit it out, that I was finally able to read a chapter and then read a book. And then, things started progressing from there, but it reared its ugly head once again in sophomore year of college. And then that's the first time sophomore year of college as a 19-year-old that I finally reached out to you. I can remember calling up and be like, listen, this shit's coming back. I've kind of feel like I've suppressed it here for the past several months, but it's coming back hard. I need to see somebody. And from there, once I did, it was like, and they prescribed the Prozac at the time to treat the OCD. It was like, my world changed entirely. Like, it was an entirely state of existence. The dark clouds that had shadowed my brain for the past decade entirely lifted and the sun was shining. It was beautiful. And it has been that way ever since. And it's not a matter of depression. It's just a matter of obsessive thinking.
Yes.
And the dark clouds only return when I get off the medicine. So I want to explore. I definitely, these podcast episodes aren't going to be all interviews with my family and friends, right? I want to get into these aspects of psychological existence, psychiatric existence, all aspects of human existence with experts and thought leaders in all of those areas. And I want to lay the base first by having interviews with people that I know and respect and love. So anyway.
And I think this conversation is incredibly important because right now I can think of children that I know who are little, not even they're second graders, third graders who have tendencies that they can't, they can't verbalize. They have no idea what, and I'm sure they're beginning their hiding process.
Oh yeah.
And then we have a conceptualization of mental health issues as making the person like some crazy person.
Lesser.
Yes. And it's no different in a neurology than having any, like we're going to have in diabetes. And also people who are coping, think about the strength of character it just took you to continue to survive. And the compassion it took you to continue to survive, because I recognize that those choices about not suicide had to do with impact that it would have had on family.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's the number one impact. That's the number one thing that's always prevented me from not killing myself, even in recent months and years, is, if I were a person without connections to people that cared about me, I would have ended my life long ago, I think. For sure. And you're right, man. Like, in a lot of ways, think how fortunate I was to be going through those issues in the life context in which I was experiencing them, with an extremely loving mother and supportive siblings, and like a relatively middle class area with an educated mother. I think, I've been blessed to be, a relatively intelligent person, to have perspective on life. Like, imagine people who are experiencing similar issues just in this country who don't have the same supportive family environment, who may not have the same cognitive capacities, who may not be in the same school environment, who don't have the access to the same medical care. And that's just in this country. Imagine people experiencing those issues in the third world. It's no wonder that experiencing these mental health issues has given me so much compassion and support to people that we quote unquote call crazy. The guy that you see when you're driving down the street who's like mumbling and talking to himself, right? That dude could have experienced the exact same type of issues that I did during my early adolescence, and yet just had a completely different life situation around
environmental
him.
response.
The
Exactly.
the lack of support, or the lack of, perhaps genetic gifts, and shit just spirals out of control from there. Right. And we don't know where these things come from, man. We don't know if these are entirely genetic related. We don't know if it's a result of the garbage that I ate as a child, like eating Wendy's, 3 times a week. And when I was in high school, eating ice cream every night.
Coca-Cola products.
Yeah.
I'm thinking Coke's going to be
For
one
sure.
of, I hate Coca-Cola people. I think you're going to be the source of all negative.
For sure. I mean, sugar is...
I think it's really more an autoimmune response. I don't know. I think it's this is what I think is going to come if people ever let this out. It's kind of like cigarettes. Or people, when are they going to tell us?
Yeah, for sure. When's the sugar industry going to get exposed
Yes.
for the impact they're having on health?
But the inflammation that sugar causes and things like that. I do really think that we have created some kind of aberrant autoimmune response in the population that's greater than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
But genetically, you do have your dad too. So then that's hard to know for sure.
We don't know, but
Yeah.
like most things, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right?
Yes,
There's probably a
yes.
combination of genetic
Yes,
factors
yes.
and environmental influence.
And you've had enough head injuries too with
Right,
regard to
started
sports
getting
and
dropped on
things
my
like
head
that
and
when you were
a
when you
week
were
old.
born. And well, not a week, but by a month. And then you've had
for sure.
horrible
Oh.
soccer head injuries.
Oh, for
and-
sure. I
and
suffered concussions. There's the
flew
time.
out of a tree and landed in the street. And
Yeah, head injuries throughout my life that you just get
Yeah.
right back up and start playing again. You just didn't know.
Yeah. This for me, the biggest my biggest regret is for myself. The thing I'm most critical about myself, the thing I'd most like to change about myself is it's probably my strength and my weakness, because I can see all sides to things. Is one of my, I think, a really wonderful quality about me. I feel that allows me to accept most everyone, but it also makes it harder for me to know for sure what the right action to take about things is. So like when your OCD developed and I took you to see Dr. Pape and then we went to see Dr. Little, and you were so against medication, and Dr. Little clarified for me, she felt strongly that we shouldn't force you, but then there are other doctors, and I know parents who required their children to take the medication. So since the antidepressant works so well for you, it could have been that you could have experienced relief had I been more...
Oh, for sure.
Like, you must take this medication, but I never required that of you. You also concealed it so much that I was never sure. I knew it was there because I would see you pull your socks up 1,000 times before you shot a basketball. Or I would see you do this with the soccer ball over your head, to almost throwing it and not being able to. And that's when your athletic ability started to decline. You weren't as competitive because you were having to. Sports is an automatic, reflexive kind of thing, and you are one of the most intelligent. You're physically competent and capable, but you're also a very intelligent and intuitive sports player, and that was impaired because you were probably less than in regular life, but still checking and double and not being able to respond automatically.
The same thing as in the classroom, as with on the athletic field. 95% of my cognitive capacity was being devoted or being sucked away by the OCD.
Yeah.
It's impossible to act intuitively.
Yes. And so for me as a parent, you have to think too, like I put you in the car or you get on a school bus, you drive away, I go to work. The majority of our time is not together. We come home, you do homework, or you go to practice. As much sports as you played, I spent most of my time driving you somewhere. So the times when I was actually visually or observing your behavior were like at sports events, or when we sat the rare occasions when you needed me to do your homework or help with homework. So you were able to hide things because you're also a very active and socially engaged person in terms of being outside with your friends and stuff like that. So I was able to tell myself it had gotten better, and there was only suspicions and hints and whispers of things, and I wasn't really I was aware enough to keep caking you back. And then I tried the neurology part. And I remember you telling them that nothing was happening until the very end of that conversation. So I apologize for maybe not forcing you to go on an antidepressant. I will never know what the right or wrong thing to do with regard to that would have been. Because I hate that you were tortured that way. I guess it's made you who you are, so I should not regret. I regret the pain.
Yeah, I wish the pain hadn't happened either, but in some ways I think the pain was a good thing. I don't think I would be in the position I am right now making this podcast or pursuing the things that I want to pursue in terms of helping other people experiencing these issues going forward in my life, or, my experiences in the educational system working with kids who experience incredibly traumatic situations or incredibly deeply entrenched mental issues. I don't think I'd be able to have the same success I've had with those kids if I hadn't experienced what I've experienced. I think it built a lot of character. I think it built a lot of perseverance. I think it's certainly given me an incredible perspective on life. There are very few things that faze me or that I see as daunting now.
It puts what's important really in perspective too.
Oh, absolutely. It puts life in perspective completely. And I think ultimately, it sucks. I feel that, let's see, like 11 to 20, like a decade of my life was taken away in a lot of ways. Athletically, I think that's like where my biggest
regret.
I don't even want to say regret, or like kind of it stabs the deepest is athletically, because I really think, I could have developed my athletic capacities in a lot of ways. But in some ways, I think about it all the time. I'm kind of glad it didn't, because in the biggest way it harmed me was with football. In a lot of ways, because I couldn't, the pads, there's just literally so much equipment going on that like, it's an OCD nightmare.
That's the first time I've heard this, though.
It's a minefield. The helmet, having to strap it on and strap it off, getting the pants on the pants. Football was an OCD nightmare for me because there's just so many like factors on your body that you have to take care of. And it's so precise with like lining up and all, each play. But in a lot of ways, I'm really glad that, and I tried to, I made an attempt to play college football actually at Louisiana Monroe, and, that didn't go anywhere for a physical injury. I was hurting another physically, so I wasn't able to continue playing. But in a lot of ways, I'm really happy that I didn't ever develop my football career because of what we know about concussions and CTE now. Mm-hmm. And I was already experiencing traumatic mental issues and psychological distress. Imagine how bad it could have gotten if, acute physical damage was being caused to my brain on a daily basis. I could be in a mental institution now. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, I think maybe, I had to sacrifice 10 years of my life or experience 10 years of psychological English, but maybe in the long run, it's better because now I have a functional brain relatively for the rest of my life.
And I think your level of empathy would be totally different had you been a big football star. Mm-hmm. Your physiology is the biggest thing, but then the spiritual impact, I think, it's like when Katie wanted to be, was a theater major and an actor. I thought, God, how self-oriented you become. And I'm not saying, I shouldn't say every single person but you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It I don't know. I think there's...
Yeah, when you experience individual success, it's impossible not to become a little self-indulgent or self-involved or lose your perspective on humanity.
Yeah.
For sure. I want to close up with transitioning, speaking of humanity, just to get your thoughts on, I think you have a very interesting perspective on religion, on God, if you want to use that term, on powers greater than ourselves. Talk to us as we close out here about your development as a spiritual being throughout your life.
I guess I'll just start with like my religious influences. I've just always felt so connected to other human beings that connection, I guess love just makes me think has always made me think there's something more. And then, of course, I was raised Methodist, and then we were in Congregational church. And I can remember my 5th grade Sunday school teacher talking about Christ. And of course, that message is so simple. If we just follow that message, we wouldn't have any problems. And feeling the truth of that, and the truth that Jesus was probably the person that was, that was Christ, which is a designation and an expectation that humanity held. I believe in race consciousness. I think the reason I'm going from
race consciousness, can you get into that a little bit? Because that's kind of a nebulous term that I haven't entirely wrapped my mind around yet.
Yeah, I don't know that I can totally.
An interconnectedness of
the human race.
Yes. That we all share a common consciousness.
Yes, not a white race or a black race.
Right.
Although I'm sure within the human race consciousness, there are cultural consciousnesses running and expectations and belief systems, fears and worries that if we just, as people say, substitute those with thoughts of love and peace and truth and harmony, then we could alter that consciousness.
As a human race, we experience each other's fears and worries, right?
Yes.
These manifest, it's all part of the same human consciousness, universal consciousness, energetic connection amongst individuals. And I think that aspect of your spiritual development is probably the most recent occurrence, although it probably is underpinned all along in a less obvious way, what you've always thought.
My early things were just the connection to people and being unable to, if I could decide to act, to be so aware of other people's pain that I felt pain myself. So I had to do something to offer comfort even when I was little. And then I needed that belief in God and a power greater than us so that I could feel that there was something that was going to alleviate that for people. And then when I was exposed to the Baha'i faith, which believes in progressive revelation, there was an intellectual attraction to that concept, but I also read the writings of the manifestation, and for at least a year, only read those exclusively in all my spare time after you guys went to bed, and couldn't care less about anything superficial like TV or movies or anything, because the truth of those, what that prophet, who I believe to be another manifestation of God, wrote, and it was all about the equality of human beings, just the nature of God continuing forever. And now I'm struggling with that faith just because there's some limits on their acceptance of not homosexuality, but homosexuality as a lifestyle. Also, there's so many rules within the faith, and I'm just not that black and white. So I feel like I'm struggling because I feel like I'm kind of betraying this other faith, but I felt the same way when I left the Methodist Church when we became Baha'i.
Yeah, so you were raised Methodist. You met my father. I was teaching Sunday school at the Methodist Church. Then the transition to Baha'i faith occurred. How and when?
When you were in kindergarten, a friend of ours had come and had been allowed to speak to your class during a holy day for the Baha'i faith, and she made the statement to you: all people are not black or white; they are different shades of tan. And you shared that with me when I referred to a child in your classes. I was at the little black boy who fell asleep in my lap on a bus because I had been on a field trip with you. And you said, "Mommy, people are not black or white. They're different shades of tan." And that was a very profound statement that I thought for a moment you had created in your own mind. And then realized, after talking to you, that it was coming from Melanie. And I asked her about her faith a couple months later when I took time off from work to go on another field trip with your class. And she shared the faith with me, and it, it's the global nature of the faith, the seeing the world as one family, and wanting no segregation between countries, but just to see it as as a human race on a global planet. So all of that was very attractive to me, and I was in the The faith has no clergy, so they elect 9 members, community members every year to be on the local spiritual assembly. The tendency is, as in every human thing, to have a flaw, which is if you get elected to assembly, you never seem to get off of assembly. And so at least 6 core people seem to stay on there all the time. And so I've been on assembly, unless I just backed off the faith altogether for a year, which I've done every now and then just to relook at what I'm doing. I've been on assembly, and I'm off now for the same reason. But in that assembly, you have to make decisions about, because you're operating the religious rules of the faith.
Essentially the local governing body of
the
faith.
The faith. So you're in charge of marriage and divorce and things like that. And so there just been a couple incidences where I felt like I personally couldn't tell someone else what to do, and the rules. My belief is that the person's name was Hussein Ali, and then he was given the designation of the glory of God, which in Farsi is Baha'u'llah. And
this
so
is
the manifestation, there are 2 manifestations, like Jesus and like Muhammad and like Buddha and Krishna and all.
This is the Jesus, Muhammad, or Buddha of Baha'i faith.
The Baha'i faith, right. And Baha'u'llah. So he wrote a set of social laws, as well as he wrote just an unending amount of spiritual truths. And I still have no problem with the spiritual truths. It's just, I'm just feel that the social laws seem to have application to the 1800s and to even somewhat more specifically the Middle East at the time. I mean, he doesn't do things like the headdress or any of that. There's no those kinds of things. There are some references to the length of hair and beard and things like that for men and stuff, but that seem very cultural. So I think 2 things with regard to the Baha'i faith. Either Baha'u'llah's laws were actually intended for humanity for all time until the next manifestation of God comes, or the next spirit. If you're in the spiritual living center, you're not seeing God as like a personification, which is a problem I have. I don't think God is a personification. I think God is an undefined essence of things that human beings are part of. And since human beings have intellect, then I assume that this essence has even greater, whatever we want to refer to as intellect capacity. In the spiritual living center, they refer to it as laws that govern things just like gravity. But I also, if the most simple thing would be just to say the love, would be like my single word for whatever that is, because that's what
essentially God is love.
Yes. And that's what connects. That's what I feel, that love that I feel for everybody, if they would accept it, is why I believe there's something more, because it just seems stronger than just each one of us individually. But back to the faith, a big problem I have with the faith is that they recognize that people have homosexual, maybe they, I don't know if they'd say born homosexual, but whatever, that they have homosexual feelings or attractions or whatever, but they don't want them to act on those. Certainly people are homosexual, but they're not going to get married to another person of the same gender.
To recognize homosexual as a legitimate human concept, but that if you are homosexual, you should resist the temptation. Sort
of like alcoholism. You shouldn't drink.
And you're not on board with that.
Okay, so again, I'm not a black or white person, so I know rationally that could be correct. I don't believe that it's correct. I also recognize that my belief system, which is that every human being should be allowed to love who they want to love, and that I don't like, I've lost a word.
Prohibition?
No, I don't like just sex, just as a
promiscuity.
Thank you. Words are leaving me lately. I don't like promiscuity. I like sex to be the greatest aspect of your love for another human being.
Gotcha.
So I think in the past, homosexuality had a tendency to be very promiscuous because it was put in the dark shadows of life. Yes. Now I love the fact that it's just that we are normalizing it because it's normal.
Because it's love.
Yes, because it's love. So, but I also recognize that our belief systems are being changed by the media and everything, let's say television, movies, things like that. But what still comes back to me is it's love when it's truly love. Mm-hmm. So I just can't go back to the other. And so that's when I've had to my attraction to the SLCA, which is, they say they're kind of want nothing to be wrong in the sense of, whatever happens is happening for a reason.
Right.
But I like just the open acceptance of things. And I like the nebulousness and the definition of God. I like the acceptance of all religions, which is what the Baha'i faith does as well. But there's still a little bit of tendency for every single religion to think it's the right religion.
Right.
And in that faith, it is, because it's the next religion, it is still seen by everybody as the right religion. So then I think we get back to a dogma. We get back to a exclusivity.
Them.
Yes, and SLCA can easily start to become
SLCA being the New Thought movement.
Yeah, that could end up being the same thing.
Exactly.
So it's what you have to kind of watch. So I've struggled with this because I'm a loyal person. So my loyalty is to the Baha'is, my loyalty is to Baha'u'llah. But I've decided, and a lot of that being the New Thought movement, that's okay. This is just my next step in development. And if it makes me a better, more connected, I pray better. The only problem with it is that I'm a person who feels guilty about everything. So when I can't change my thought or I'm going to feel responsible for everything because it's like my responsibility not to have the right mindset, so I'm not sure how I feel about having that level of personal responsibility, because I already feel personally responsible.
You feel guilty that you're abandoning your previous faith?
Well, I mean, I mean, since Morgan's gone to Greece and is working with all the children, that I can't shake that. I can't, I want to say all children will be there. I was listening to a meditation the other day, and she said all children will know their self-worth, and all children, all children will know their self-worth. All children will be happy and full of joy and will be well fed. And I just say full to myself because I want it to be a single word. But in the SLCA, you wouldn't say will be, you would say all children are. And when I say that, though, it feels hypocritical because all children are not those things.
Right. Your daughter's working with Syrian refugees who have been displaced by a horrible civil war and are struggling to survive on a daily basis. Yes. And that's just one example of a small group of people that are experiencing that kind of struggle. That kind of struggle is experienced by millions of children and adults around the world. So yes, it's nice to say and to affirm that all is great as a means of manifesting that in your life. But reality is all things aren't great.
Except they would say all things are great because they are as they should be for this period in time, and things will change. Right. But there's still so much going on. How can you and this morning I got up, I was going to read this book, The Last Train, that Antoine Morgan, your youngest sister's boyfriend's grandfather, gave to her to read. And I started reading it, and it's about the Nazi occupation of France. And 2 pages in, I feel like I'm reading about what's happening in our own country with regard to Trump's desire to, inhibit the media and to enforce laws and rules without going through the legislative process. And people's responses were either passive, or they jumped on board, or they fled, or they did some underground movements to protest and try to resist. But, anyway, that ended in what it ended in. And I sure don't. Anyway, I had to stop reading that book because literally when those things happen, it embeds it. I'm unable to shake it off. And so that's why I can't I've gotten to the place where I have to minimize the amount of negative imagery or thoughts that I have, because
You have a visceral reaction to it.
And I just carried around.
Right. And perhaps that lends credence to the idea of race consciousness, that I think that certain human beings are more developed, more conscious,
feels less developed.
More spiritually developed, in my opinion. And another way to term that would be more conscious than others. And that doesn't mean that some people are lesser than others. It just means that certain people are in a different stage of their spiritual development. I personally feel, and obviously I may be biased or my mother, but I personally feel you are the most spiritually developed individual that I've ever met. And so when you have that,
I feel less than anyone.
When you have that visceral reaction, perhaps that lends credence to this idea of race consciousness, that you are so intimately connected to all of humanity that even your exposure to the negative aspects of humanity produces this literal physical visceral reaction that forces you incapable of continuing to expose yourself to that negativity.
It does make me freeze, though. Sometimes,
right? So,
like tonight, I was going to have friends over to have a Super Bowl party. Have I done anything about this? I was determined to organize my own 60th birthday party as a gift to the people that I love, to say here, but I haven't done it, and I suspect I won't do it.
That's your own next stage of human development, right? None of us are perfect. You may be very spiritually developed and spiritually connected and energetically connected to all of the human race, but yet you are very flawed as an individual, perhaps in some ways. So that's it. To me, in my mind, that's in a lot of ways, that's what the human experience is all about.
Yes.
Recognizing our gifts, recognizing our flaws, and doing our best on a daily basis to improve ourselves and be our highest selves on a daily basis as a means of fully integrating, fully experiencing human existence. And I think that's a great way to kind of close out this podcast too, because that's what I want this podcast to be. I want this podcast to be a conversation with thought leaders and interesting human beings about how all of us, each of us, every day can do our best to be our highest selves. So I'm going to close it there.
Yeah, that's my desire too.
Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. Thank you very much for joining us. I love you very much. Thank you for being my mother and all of you have given me.
Thank you for joining me in my life a long time ago.
You're very welcome.